Welcome everyone to our presentation today. My name's Gerard Domingo. I'm an asset management assurance specialist at V-Line. I'm a chemical engineer. I've been working for about 15 years in design and operations in mining, munitions and chemical industry. For the last 6 or so years, I've been working in asset management, mainly with Melbourne Water Utility, and now at V-Line. And co-presenting with me today is Ralph Goddo.
Yeah, and how are you? And thanks, Gerard. Yeah, I've been in the business for probably too long, about 40-something years, but in terms of the rail industry and asset management, it's probably been about 10. Been very fortunate to work for other railways, so I have a broader perspective that I've been able to bring to V-Line. I worked in MTM for 5 years and helped them get ISO 55001. Also worked with Yarra Trams, and also had the opportunity to work in New York with the Department of Subway. So I actually have a pretty diverse set of views, and I'm pretty pleased I was able to bring a lot of those to this role. So I'll give you back to Gerard.
So Ralph and I will be talking to you today around our topic of leveraging existing processes to build an ISO 55001 certified asset management system. So I'll give you context for who V-Line is. V-Line is an operating agency as part of Victoria's integrated transport portfolio. Our role is as an accredited operator of passenger services, including rail and coach throughout regional Victoria, a freight access provider, a maintainer of infrastructure and rolling stock and project deliverer, and a key contributor towards Victoria's large infrastructure projects.
Yeah, I guess you just go back one. I think it's important probably to say that we're a government entity, and so therefore our relationship with DOT is quite different in terms of the funding and just how we work through issues, different to MTM and Yarra Trams, for example.
Yeah. DOT being the Department of Transport, which is authority under the state government for those playing at home. So the certification journey. Why work towards ISO 55001 certification? The main driver for V-Line was through a partnership agreement. That's the contract between the state, the Department of Transport, DOT, and V-Line as a corporation. The contract sets out the subsidy funding and the performance expectations for V-Line as an organisation. Secondary driver for that is maturity. One of those measurements of maturity is through the Asset Management Accountability Framework and the annual attestation that V-Line does to DOT and the Department of Treasury and Finance on an annual basis. Challenges for working towards certification have certainly been V-Line operates within a complex operating environment. We don't own a majority of the assets within our portfolio, and they're actually leased to us, where we only operate and maintain them. Our funding cycle is actually quite challenging as well, because we used to be on a 12-month funding basis. So we went from financial year to financial year. One of the biggest challenges in achieving certification was there already was a department called Asset Management, which caused quite a bit of confusion when you're explaining asset management principles and how they were different to a department called Asset Management.
Yeah, and I guess, Gerard, it's also that V-Line is noted as being generally has been underfunded in the past, and the general concern that there is a potential backlog issue with renewal, and so the Department of Transport is quite keen for us to take a longer term perspective, and I think that's why they're quite keen for us to move down this path of ISO 55001.
Very much so, yeah. So as an accredited rail operator, V-Line's management system in place was designed to meet the requirements of the Office of the National Safety Regulator, the Safety Management System, ONSA's management system. Safety management system focused on the minimum requirements of rail safety national law, as well as health, safety, environment, and quality as set out by Australian standards and ISO standards such as 9001, 45001, and 14001, which V-Line are also certified to. To establish the baseline of compliance to ISO 55001, a high-level gap analysis was undertaken in August 2018 on the safety management system. Now, asset management, being a key pillar of the safety management system, was found not to fully align to ISO 55001, and there was a high potential risk of non-conformance to that standard. So with the baseline identified, several teams are established to build the system foundation and begin closing those compliance gaps. The Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, so the GFAM Asset Management Landscape, combined with the Institute of Asset Management's conceptual model for asset management, were used as the framework for developing and defining the asset management system. Foundational documents such as the asset management policy were revised to guide the development of a fit-for-purpose asset management system and the proposed asset management maturity journey.
And I think in this particular case, Gerard, it's fairly important to note that this was taken, that the signing off of the policy and the SAMP and stuff was done at a board level.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So it's not signed off by the CEO. The CEO had to go to the board, and the board had to understand the implications for the organisation, which I think is quite impressive.
Yes. Yeah. So at the start of 2019, the first AMAF self-assessment was undertaken within the organisation. As V-Line had a low asset management maturity and knowledge of asset management, business units participating in the attestation were selected based on their function and role within the asset life cycle. The purpose of the attestation was both an exercise to clarify the roles of business units across the organisation, as well as measuring what they thought the maturity was of processes and documents they were using as part of their day-to-day activities. As part of the briefing of the attestation, participants were informed and educated around the definition of what an asset is, the types of assets, and how their team function within the organisation fit into the overall asset life cycle. It was also explained that by self-assessing against AMAF, which is itself derived from ISO 55001, the organisation was preparing towards being certified.
Before you move on, Gerard, I think you should make a note that you actually set up the framework for doing that attestation. Am I correct? There's actually a website on the AMF website. There's actually a spreadsheet I think that you designed.
Yes, the tool that we employed at V-Line, I built myself, and it's available on the Department of Treasury and Finance website. So if you are participating in doing the AMF attestation, you can click and use that tool and then measure your maturity against all of those 41 requirements. That's correct.
Yeah, good work.
Thank you. So the main challenge when engaging with the wider organisation regarding AMF was that there was a department already called asset management. Contextualising the requirements and how they were applicable to different business functions required a lot of consultation and education. In the end, the biggest win came from simply replacing the term asset management with their own business unit name. The mental barrier of associating the intent of an asset management requirement and the department asset management was suddenly removed, and the context was established and the requirement made sense. The simple change allowed the subsequent discussions and understanding around how their role within the business contributed to asset management and the principles of ISO 55001.
And I think, Gerard, that principle was applied throughout the project. So Gerard and the team that he's involved in also had a change manager.
Yes.
And as part of that change management role was to ensure that relevant communication went out throughout the process of bringing people on board and understanding the role of an enterprise asset management system. So, and that was from the top down. So, we had coaching sessions that were from the general manager all the way down to the guys in the field. So to fully understand where they fit, how they, what role they play, and also looking for their contribution. It's a two-way feed thing. And we did this across not just those people that work in what we call the physical side of asset management, also, but in the people that support asset management, which is in safety, in purchasing, in the people area, etc., etc. You know, they all were part of that process.
Yeah, exactly. And having a change manager was one of the critical steps in the team that drove this program.
Yeah, and the chap we had was yeah, Andrew was quite skilled at doing this stuff for us, wasn't he?
Andrew Norman, very good change manager. Search him on LinkedIn.
Like your work there, Gerard.
Oh,
this is me. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm just tuning back in again. Right. So one of the things that I found and I got heavily involved in was to help build basically the asset management system. But I also had to recognize that there was already an existing V-line management system, one that was, as Gerard mentioned earlier, built from a concept through safety management, through ONSA, through the development of other standards like the environmental standard, the quality standard, and starting to incorporate that into the V-line management system, is that there was already an existing system of which, as you can see, there are a number of pillars, and within those one of them is asset management. And so we literally went in and we worked with our partners in HSE, and were able to not only review the V-line management system, but understand how we would integrate a potential enterprise asset management system. And so a lot of work was done on both sides of the fence, because not only did we build Section 20, I think it is, within their system, we also had to modify all their relevant sections as well, because they would have a section on competency, and obviously it's a pillar within GFAM, and then they already have an established framework for competency. So it's about lining up, I guess, the HSC view of the world versus the asset management view of the world, and then bringing those two together and actually starting to take, and we actually work with organisation people, and we're actually now building a organisational view of competency built into the VMS. So a lot of great things have occurred as a result of working through this and starting to build what we call an integrated management system. And that's something I would recommend any organisation going down, is to start thinking about an integrated approach, because that's how you get the buy-in, you get the benefits that can then flow across the organisation. Would you agree, Gerard?
Yeah. Very nice.
So we'll talk about the next step about building that enterprise asset management system. Go, Gerard.
So developing the asset management system around GFAM meant there was a clear guide as to the typical artifacts used in each of the 39 subjects, and the procedures and documents identified through the AMAF attestation allowed the initial matching against GFAM, with gaps identified for future closure. The building of the foundational artifacts, such as asset management strategy and planning framework, which outlines the elements of the core asset management value chain, a strategic asset management plan and assurance framework, were all developed first to create the overall structure of the system and to guide the elements together. The establishment of governance structures and top leadership support also enabled changes which facilitated the transition towards an organisation that demonstrated a collaborative, coordinated set of activities.
Yeah, I think, and the example given there, the asset management strategy and planning framework, was because V-line had been, and Gerard, you can correct me, is that V-line were very focused on delivering a yearly program, and the whole purpose of where we're moving towards is starting to looking much further ahead. And we're actually fairly fortunate that DOT is also indicating that they want to move away from a 1 year to a 7-year funding model. And so the whole circumstances and the effort means that we're starting to take a much longer term view. Therefore, we need to provide documentation and information that supports that long term view. Is that right, Gerard?
Yeah, exactly. And so, as the skeleton of the system was being developed through the identification of existing processes and procedures, parallel asset management coaching campaigns rolled out across the organisation. To measure progress and the level of effort required to close all the gaps within the 18 months left till certification, AMCL were engaged to undertake a GFAM maturity assessment and ISO 55001 gap analysis. So in 2019, the asset management system was found to have an approximate maturity of around 35%, with significant potential risk of non-conformance to ISO 55001. In addition to that measurement, mapping of the main value chain was further defined, which was useful in generating business unit interactions. It became slightly less siloed. Benchmarking was also done with other organizations, both domestic and international, which helped the governance and executive level contextualize and compare with organizations starting out on their improvement journey. From that, corporate asset management maturity KPIs were also established, providing a maturity journey horizon over the next 5 years. So with the baseline re-established and the clear gaps identified, an intense continuous improvement program was rolled out, along with extensive asset management education campaigns spanning from the executive team right down through to field staff. This overlapping of initiatives ensured that people who were part of the system understood their role within the system and how their contribution helped the bigger picture. The scope of the system was also defined, with clear boundaries and interface points being established.
But it's interesting, Gerard, you talk very confidently, but when you actually were looking back 2 years ago and looking forward, how did you feel? How confident did you feel, that you were going to, as a team, that we were going to get there?
0%.
It was, wasn't it?
Confident.
It was, wasn't it? Because you were delving into that unknown, and you just felt that there was so many things to be done. I remember the number of corrective actions that, things that we were putting on the list that we had to follow up on as a team. And it at that time, it did feel a bit overwhelming, but it's interesting, as they were whirled away, that confidence grew, didn't it?
That's right. As we understood the remit of what we were doing, how it impacted in the business, and the business itself was maturing, and understanding what we were doing, it kind of spurred everything along. So it was dicey at certain points, but it also smoothed out at certain points.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to be real, isn't it? That's the way it is, isn't it? It's just.
Oh yeah. It's
fighting those because. And one of the things why I liked working was I was able to tell my little stories about the MTM, the similar issues at Yarra Trams and stuff like that. And it's not until you actually go through the experience that you start to understand. But boy, you learn a lot from the process. That's what I find.
Oh, for sure. One of the biggest hurdles is culture.
Yeah.
Adopting an asset management culture is one of these things, which is why we went through those education campaigns.
Yeah. And it did work off.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting part now is that when we started to use the GFAM framework, we actually adopted the AMCL. They call it the AM7 model. It's basically a high-level process model that basically considers all the key elements that are required to run a good asset management organisation. And what we did was we adapted that to use as a form of a document map, if you like, which enabled us to understand what documents that we had that actually covered that particular process. And what we found is, as we started plotting the documents across this model, we found that there were a lot of documents missing, but we also found that there were a number of documents that were probably needed to change in scope, because they didn't fully cater for all the stakeholders that might be impacted by that particular activity. And Gerard's aware of that, isn't it, Gerard? That sometimes people work in their silos. I think one of the big things that you would probably comment about where V-Line was maybe 2-3 years ago. Would you be saying they were pretty silo?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So by bringing them along on the journey, understanding where we were coming from, and understanding how their role within the wider business was quite important, it started to break down those barriers. And so people were more open with sharing and saying, hey, I've got this document and we follow this procedure, but it's not always enforced. or can't demonstrate that it's being used. How do we?
And how people are using it across other decision-making areas. And people started to realize that they had some pretty big influences on what they were doing. So
That's
the
right.
and that was that part of that cultural thing and that buy-in that we found. But this document map serves as a really good methodology to say, look, where do you fit? What are the key artifacts that you provide, and how people use that information across the organisation to make asset management decisions?
That's right. Instead of a static table, what this does is it allows the level of detail where you can see the flow of things. You can see how documents connect to each other and what dominoes basically are when you follow the line. The other thing that made it quite a useful tool is the color coding. We kept the color coding of GFAM consistent through most of the documents. So most of the strategic documents, our communications, training was all color coded, so people could easily identify and categorize things very, very quickly without having to go into the detail of certain documents.
Yeah, and other benefits of this sort of approach, process sort of level approach, is that another key player in Gerard's team, Fiona, has been able to develop a whole range of, from level 1 down to level 3 process maps.
Yep.
So that in a lot more detail, which takes this stuff to a lot more detail and helps explain people what they need to understand, they need to do, and is part of their role.
That's right. The other levels of this are the process maps, the associated RACEs and things like that. So this was the stepping stone to develop the rest of those artifacts as well.
Yeah.
So in August 2020...
By the way, that was just an alarm to tell us to keep going quickly.
Keep going, yeah. Year of improvements underway, a global pandemic reshaping the world and impacts onto our organisation. Another external maturity assessment and ISO 55001 gap analysis was conducted to determine the organisation's readiness for certification. The assessment focused mainly on the gaps to certification, with the scope for maturity set at those critical subjects which could affect us for certification. The assessment found that there was a maturity uplift to 41%, with no major potential non-conformances and a very low risk of minor potential non-conformances. There was 2 months to have a plan in place to address or to close the potential minor gaps before the certification audit was scheduled to occur. So in September 2021, Stage 1 of certification began and concluded with Stage 2 in November 2020, as the asset management system was built on a concise foundation with integration to all business units through the GFAM lens, and a result of the accelerated timeline constraint where we utilised leveraging off existing processes and reshaping the system. The certification audit found no major or minor non-conformances to ISO 55001, and subsequently V-Line was the first government organisation in Victoria to be certified to the standard in December 2020.
Yeah, and quite a proud moment, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. We had quite a concentrated timeline, and to change the business around. A lot of the ELT have commended the business itself with its encouragement to actually push things through and actually change as an organisation. Everyone at V-Line should be quite proud.
Yeah, and I'm also proud of the team that I was involved in, and so that included Gerard, Fiona
Beckley, Tupelo,
Raymond
No,
yes.
Andrew Norman, Ralph Goddell.
Yeah, great team to work with, and what I'm trying to get at there was the reason why I mentioned these names is that each of them were instrumental in making this happen, and also obviously we could probably write off another 120 names of people who were directly involved from other areas that were also, if they didn't put their efforts into this, it wouldn't be where it's at. And so and I think, Gerard, we've had this sort of conversation just obviously to tape off. Do you think the hard work is done, or is the hard work still to come?
Good question, Ralph. The hard work is only beginning, because now we move to continuous improvement. This was just the first hurdle.
Yeah, we're finding that already, isn't it?
The horizon, yep.
Yeah, we're finding that the competing pressures of business as usual and continuous improvement are always is there, and I'm thinking it's quite an interesting challenge. But I think Beeline's taking that challenge on.
Yep, very much so.
Because I think we've set a pretty tough target, haven't we, for something like.
We can save that to another AM Peak.
Yeah, I won't
session,
release.
But ran out of time. So thank you all for attending our presentation. And if you've got any questions, please reach out.
Yeah, well done, Gerard.
Thank you. Well done, Ralph.